Yes. We're alive.
Live. This is the Senate Education Committee, February 27th, 3:00 in the afternoon. We have just completed a joint hearing with the House Ed Committee and Voice and Means Committee on special ed costs. And now we're shifting gears, and we have with us Legislative Council to take this committee through on a high-ish level Act 46, its underpinnings, what it actually did, and whatever you care to share about what's happened since, just to give us the last time we tried, some level of that went voluntary school consolidation. That was the issue of Act 46. So it just it's background we need to understand as we go into what we're going into. So with that, the record.
Thank you, Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. Good afternoon. I've cheated a little bit today. So I have a very high level overview with some notes on it for you all. It's kind of it's not a one pager, it's a 3-pager. But I've also provided all the act summaries of the acts we're going to look at today. So rather than me trying and summarize what these various different acts did, I'm relying on the work of my predecessors, and the act summaries are written by Leg Counsel and provide an excellent high-level overview of what each of these acts did. So within the 3-pager that I provided, there are hot links to the acts themselves, and then Will has posted the act summaries on your website. So you should have access to all of this information through your website without having to look up anything. So we're going to do a very high level overview of Act 46. As you all know, we start over at 1 and every biennium. So there are lots of Act 46s out there. This is 2015. So acts in 2015, acts and resolves number 46. But prior to Act 46, there was lots of legislation that mentioned, addressed, somehow discussed school district consolidation. But there were 2 big ones prior to Act 46. 2010 Acts and Resolves number 153 and 2012 Acts and Resolves number 156. These are the precursors to Act 46. And Act 46 actually uses some of the language and concepts from one or both of those acts and either amends it or uses it as the base of what Act 46 did. And then there were some amendments to the timeline in Act 46 through 2017 Acts and Resolves number 49. So those are the acts we're going to be talking about today. So starting in 2010. So Act 153 was entitled An Act Relating to Voluntary School District Merger, Vertical Merger, Supervisory Union Duties, and including secondary students with disabilities and senior activities and sermons. So largely about school district merger. There's a concept that is used in Act 46 and if any of you are familiar with all of the work that went into Act 46 and prior to Act 46, you might recognize the term a RED, or Regional Education District. That was created in Act 153. And so what Act 153 did was it created a school district merger incentive program, which, spoiler alert, is what Act 46 did. For so incentives for newly formed union school districts. And you'll remember that a union school district is made up of at least 2 school districts that have gotten together and merged. So it's more responsible for the education of more than one town, municipality. So Act 153 created all of these incentives and said, if you form a union school district that had an average daily membership of at least 1,250 students, or the union school district was the result of a merger of at least 4 school districts, or both, that would be a RED, a Regional Education District. And then there were some alternative models that I don't think we need to get into. And those districts, those newly formed union districts needed to be organized to educate all grades, K through 12. Again, there were some exceptions for some tuitioning districts. They had to have a merger plan with a cost benefit analysis. They had to be designated a supervisory district or assigned to a supervisory union by the state board. They were forbidden from closing a school in the first 4 years unless they received the consent of the voters in the town where the school was located. The union school district had to have one single elected school board, and that needed to provide for statewide public high school choice and access to CTE. So if a newly formed union school district met all that criteria and it was approved by the electorate by July 1, 2017, then it got a whole bunch of incentives that included tax rate reductions, an incentive grant of $400 per pupil paid in the first year of operation, merger support grants, consulting services grants, transition facility grant, and the state board paid a portion of eligible capital debt interest. So what Act 153 did, and what Act 46 did, was it said, here's what the state wants you all to move to. Talk amongst yourselves, see if you can agree to it. And to make that more palatable, here's a whole set of incentives for you. There was no requirement that anyone merge. This was all voluntary in Act 153. Then in 2012,
Before you move on, a number of these reds were formed, correct?
Yes.
Are you gonna get,
now that there were some reds formed, I don't know how many.
okay. So a handful of districts took advantage of this opportunity and
Yes.
merged into reds.
Yes,
Okay.
in fact, the state board's final order pursuant to Act 46, specifically excluded reds. So that the requirements or the goals of Act 46 were a little different than Act 153. And so Act 46 took into account the fact that there were steps taken prior to Act 46, and those districts should be, those voluntary actions should be taken into account. So Act 156 in 2012, made some updates to the work of Act 153. So it provided varying levels of reimbursement and incentive grants to encourage school districts to work together, either contractually or by merging governance structure. So it amended some of the incentives. It provided some variations for the red structure, while also allowing those variations to be eligible for the incentives. It required the Secretary of Administration to explore the purpose, structure, duties, and authority of supervisory unions and design a revised structure, I should say, based on CTE center regions with no more than 3 SUs per regions. And it created a working group to review and evaluate how Vermont spends financial and other resources to provide high quality, equitable education opportunities throughout the state.
Discussion, how is the region, what size of the region, how they determine that?
Which region?
It says, no more than 3 SUs per region.
I think that would be this, I think that's referring to the CTE center regions.
Oh,
Again, there was more that went into Act 156. The Act summary gives you a nice overview there, and then the Act itself, obviously, but those are the high level concepts. It was really providing some updates to make Act 153 more palatable or workable or what have you.
Is there anything you can tell us about how effective that was, or what happened on the ground as a result of one of?
I can't. I can tell you that I am beginning to read some of the reports that came out of this work, and I'd be happy to send them to Will for you all. But there were some reports coming out of the Act 153 done by the Jeffrey Center for Policy Research at UVM issued some reports with some information on how Act 153 actually worked, including graphs on polling exits on the vote for mergers, etc. And tell you that the word local control appeared, the phrase local control appears a lot in these reports. But I'm not prepared to speak to them today. So we're going from 2010 to 2015. So 2010, so 153 and 156 tried, and then the legislature said, okay, well, we're going to try again in Act 46. And so what Act 46 did was it started with goals, and those goals, I think, are helpful to walk through. So this legislation is designed to encourage and support local decisions and actions that meet the following goals. Substantial equity in the quality and variety of educational opportunities statewide. Lead students to achieve or exceed the state's educational quality standards. Maximize operational efficiencies through increased flexibility to manage, share, and transfer resources with a goal of increasing the district level ratio of students to full-time staff. Promote transparency and accountability, and education that is delivered at a cost that parents, voters, and taxpayers value. I don't know that if I told you that this was written in 2015 for Act 46, you would have guessed that. I think it would be reasonable to guess that it was written yesterday, right? But that is verbatim taken out of Act 46. And those goals are referred to throughout Act 46. There was explicit legislative intent in Act 46 that the legislative intent was not to close small schools, but rather to ensure that those schools have the opportunity to enjoy the expanded educational opportunities and economies of scale that are available to schools within larger, more flexible governance models. That was explicit legislative intent. It also required that all changes contemplated pursuant to Act 46 preserve the ability of tuitioning districts to continue to tuition and operating districts to continue to operate. So we just talked about A, B, and C under Act 46. We had goals and we had legislative intent. So all policy, nothing operational yet. We get into the operational piece in D. So Act 46 required the state to remember the provision of education is the responsibility of the state at the end of the day, not the local school districts. So the state, on or before July 1, 2019, to provide educational opportunities through sustainable governance structures designed to meet the goals of the Act through one of the following models. And then Act 46 lays out the preferred structure with some variations in there and the alternative structure. So the preferred structure was a school district that was responsible for the education of all resident pre-K through grade 12 students. It was its own supervisory district, which means it's one school district. A minimum average daily membership of 900. Notice that's quite different than Act 153, which was 1,250. And it's organized and operates according to one of the following models. So you operate all grades, you operate pre-K through grade 8 and you tuition 9 through 12. You operate pre-K through 6 and you tuition 7 through 12, or you're totally non-operating, you tuition for pre-K through 12. That's the preferred structure. An alternative structure could be okay if it was an SU, a supervisory union with multiple member districts, and it could meet the state's goals if the member districts consider themselves to be collectively responsible for the education of all pre-K through 12 students in the SU. The SU operates in a manner that maximizes efficiencies through economies of scale and the flexible management, transfer, and sharing of non-financial resources among member districts. The SU has the smallest number of member school districts practicable, achieved whenever possible by the merger of districts with similar operating and tuitioning patterns. And the combined ADM of all member districts is not less than 1,100 students. So if a school district was going to propose a governance structure different from the preferred structure, so an alternative structure, it needed to prove that it had evaluated the ability to its proposed alternative structure was evaluated for its ability to meet or exceed state goals, that it had met with other districts in the area to discuss ways to promote improvement in meeting the state's goals throughout the region. And it was required to submit an alternative governance structure proposal to the state board individually or with other districts. I think you may have heard a Section 9 proposal. Section 9 was the alternative structure section in Act 46. So again, talk amongst yourselves, figure out how in the field you meet these goals. And if you meet them, here's a whole bunch of incentives. So there were tiers of incentives. So the first tier was accelerated activity. So if a newly merged school district was operational by 7/1/17, the tax rates would decrease over the first fiscal 5 years. They were eligible for a merger support grant, and they were eligible for a transition facilitation grant.
The clarifying questions. I don't know if it's actually a clarifying question, but so if tax rates are decreasing with these incentives, but there's inflation and the cost of things in general, services are rising, would that essentially just cause the actual cost to remain the same or low?
The budgets wouldn't change. Tax rates would decrease. And the way that the education fund worked then and continues to work now is the whole state bears those costs. So if tax rates are decreased in one district, then everyone bears the responsibility of carrying that extra weight out of the ed budget. The next tier was extended eligibility for RED incentives. So remember, REDs were a concept in Act 153 in 2010 with their own incentives. And people were still out there trying to figure out how to make REDs work. And Act 46 wanted to honor that process. And so Act 46 said, well, we're going to extend your eligibility for incentives to if the electorate votes to approve your RED structure by 7/1/17. And you would get a tax reduction during the first 4 years of operation, a merger support grant, and a transition facilitation grant. And then the third tier was later mergers. So groups of districts that merge into one of the four most common structures, and the new district is operational by 7/1/19. Then they would get a tax rate reduction during the first 4 years, be eligible for a merger support grant, but no transition facilitation grant. So the way that union school district formation works on a voluntary level under current law is the state board ultimately has to approve union school district formations. And so all of these voluntary mergers were subject to state board approval. But this act automatically under Chapter 11 of Title 16. But Act 46 required the Secretary of Education to review the governance structures as they would exist on July 1, 2019, and submit a plan to the state board to move districts into the preferred structure, or if necessary, into that alternative governance structure to meet the state's goals through Act 46. So then the state board is required to review the proposal and issue an order merging and realigning districts and SUs where necessary to meet the state's goals and purposes of the act. But that merger order was not applicable to interstate school districts, CTE districts, and recently voluntarily merged districts. So if you got together and you merged voluntarily, you would not be subject to this order. But as I've noted, the state board is still required to approve all of those voluntary mergers under Chapter 11 and Title 46. And Act 46 also required the board to consider the goals of the act when considering those voluntary mergers. And so the state board issued their order in November of 2018. And it did result in several, and I should have sent Will a link. I will send him after a link to the final order, but it did result in several, the state board ordering several mergers that were not voluntary. Put a pin in that. I want to come back to that piece for something for you all to consider as you continue this work. In 2017, Act 49 made was the miscellaneous ed bill that year, and it made some useful changes. I'm taking this out of the Act summary. Useful changes to the merger timelines and allowable governance structures under Act 46 without weakening or eliminating that Act's fundamental phased merger and incentive structures and requirements. So I didn't think it would help.
Better than useless changes. Yes.
I'm sorry.
Better than useless changes.
Yes, better than you changes. All subjective. So Act 49 pushed out some dates. What I wanted you to put in a pin on was that the State Board of Education created school districts through Act 46. There was a lawsuit on that called Athens. And the Vermont Supreme Court ultimately upheld the state board's final order, and therefore all of the school districts that were merged into that order. But as if you'll remember back to the beginning of this session, when I talked about Dillon's rule and Vermont being a Dillon's rule state, you, the General Assembly of the legislature, have the power and the sole power to create municipalities. School districts are municipalities. So how did the state board get to do that? Well, the Vermont Supreme Court basically said that thanks to all of the guidance and intent and purpose language that the legislature put into Act 46 and Act 49, that your delegation of that authority to the State Board of Education, when taken in the context of the history of education in the state and the role that the state board has played, was a lawful delegation of your authority. So very specific to the words on the page in Act 46 and Act 49 and the history of the State Board of Education and the role it has played in Vermont related to school governance. All of that to say, we are a Dillon rule state, so you all have the ultimate authority to create municipalities, including school districts. And if you are contemplating any delegation of that authority, Athens says that may or may not be okay. It depends on how much guidance you give that other entity. And history might matter as well. So it's not a given that any sort of delegation to create a municipality would end up being constitutional. So Act 46 did a lot of other things, and you can see it if you look at the Act summary. It made some changes to Act 153 and Act 56, and it made some other changes. But what we're talking about and what I just walked through in Act 46 did not make any changes to the Green Books. That was all session law. There were definitely parts of Act 46 that made changes to the Green Books, but what I just walked through was all session law, meaning it lives in, it's on the books forever until you repeal it or amend it. But it was a point in time. It was a direction to the state to take certain actions based on certain guidance by the legislature with some time limited incentives. It did not change how school districts are formed or any of their, broadly speaking, any of their ultimate responsibilities. So it's, I would say, different than you all creating brand new school districts and perhaps even realigning responsibilities between SU responsibilities and school district responsibilities for the future. Act 46 was really, here's a directive to the field, figure it out yourselves, and if you can't do it, the state board's going to make you do it.
And can that be given to the agent, the Secretary of Education? Can you switch it to that as well? Does it matter which one you get?
I think it's that would be its own individual analysis. I think the State Board of Education lives in the executive branch in that it is not part of the judicial branch and that it is not part of the legislature, but it is an independent board. I would have to give that some thought, but the legislature delegating municipal granting authority to the executive branch, a cabinet member appointment, I think would be a very different analysis. But I'm not the Supreme Court and I am not a judge, so I can't tell you for sure.
Questions?
I was looking for the punchline. Yeah, I didn't find it. With Act 153, 156, 46, is there any kind of notion of the number of SUs, the number of districts, and in particular, cost impacts or savings or net effects, that kind of thing?
I am not aware of a comprehensive analysis of the cost savings and effectiveness of Act 46.
Okay, what about numbers?
Yeah, I don't have those off the top of my head, and that is something I definitely should have tried you, so I will get those for you.
And by that, what was exactly what you asking for though, for you to get?
Like maybe how many, so what I'm taking is how many school districts existed before the final act, the final order of the state board for Act 46, and maybe even going back to what it looks like at pre-Act 153. Is that accurate?
Okay.
Plus any cost impact if joint fiscal, not city council, joint fiscal had some type of summary in that effect.
I will send the links to the studies that I have found done through the Jeffords Center pursuant to Act 153 and Act 156. But I am not aware of any studies that have been done on the effectiveness of Act 46 officially. There may be various pieces of research out there, but something commissioned by the legislature to that extent, I'm not aware of it.
We're thinking the same thing here. I think, I did get some information from the Agency of Education about that topic recently. I'm still taking a dive into it, and I can share that with you, or actually the committee. The conversation of cost savings, whether they happened or didn't happen, is something I'd like to take a deeper dive into. On one hand, I hear Act 46 was meant to save people or save towns and district money, but it didn't. And then on the other hand, I hear that it did save money, but it got reinvested into new programs and new positions, which remain, and that costs more money. So, but I think it could also be different depending on the district and how, and whether they actually did receive savings and whether or not they reinvested them or how they reinvested them. So just a couple different ideas swirling around that it would be nice to get more information.
Good questions. Yes.
So I'd like to actually add on to it because so what I was curious about was the effect on SUs, effect on number of districts. But really what it all should boil down to is the number of schools. The number of schools change over time, which my fairly limited experience with these acts was we began to merge administrative units, whether they be SUs or districts, but schools, it didn't have a net effect. That was maybe potentially envisioned. I'm not sure if that was an intent, early on, but, the schools remained the same, but the administrative units began to compress. That was the net effect.
I would say Act 46 has explicit legislative intent that the purpose of Act 46 was not to close small schools.
Yeah, said right here on the.
It did.
One thing I keep hearing is, and I know people are like, what our taxpayers really want to see is their property tax go down, and they're not worried about education costs, which I think is a misconception, that a lot of my constituents are concerned about what it costs to educate our children, and in turn, that is what is affecting their tax rate. So I hope as we keep moving forward that we don't just say, hey, we're looking to get people a tax cut. What we're looking to do is have affordable education that at an affordable rate that will in turn give us a better tax value.
And hopefully better education outcomes.
Yes. Just because you put quality education in there doesn't mean it's gonna.
Any further questions? Yes.
Just a comment, James, because I went through that 46 at the municipal level, and it almost appears like it was kind of a free for all, because they gave everybody a deadline to have it done by. And the ones that jumped on it really got the benefit, the ones that didn't. So we need to try to straighten that. It's fun.
So anything else? That was really helpful, by the way.
Yes,
Excellent. And yeah, sending over those.
Yes, absolutely. I should have had those.
If you don't mind, when you do it, hack on the Athens in case.
Oh, Athens, yeah.
Throw that in. I'd like
Yes.
to read that over the break. Just because
So
You have nothing else?
So what I gathered from that is that the legislator has the ultimate say. But if we do the wording right, we can give the Board of Education the power to do as the legislators want.
I think that what Athens stands for is that in that particular instance, it was okay. I don't know. I think it's going to be a different analysis every time. And maybe if I reread it and you read it over break, if there's value in continuing, for a larger presentation on that, I can talk to my GovOps colleagues who are a little bit more well-versed.
well, I wouldn't spend too much time on it because I think we're not delegating.
That's the cleanest way to do it.
So maybe some element of delegation. So it may become relevant, but for now, I think it's less likely.
Not delegate to AOE or the state board that you.
Well, it depends on what of course, it depends on what we're talking about delegating.
Yeah.
I was thinking about things like district boundaries, which my own games we need to do, not anybody else. So any further questions? So again, thank you. That was really helpful. And Senator on himself, I didn't see,
No, I just popped back on the screen in case we're talking or something now.
good. Well, we are, unless you have anything you want to say, we're about to adjourn.